Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this June 15, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Our opening story tonight, the Sunni extremist group that has taken territory across Iraq has released video and photos that appear to show its fighters preparing to massacre Iraqi soldiers. This video, we rolled past it, but it contains a opening slide that says this video may contain some disturbing images.
In a country not short on atrocities, this is probably the worst one since Saddam Hussein fell in 2003. The pictures proudly posted by ISIS on Twitter show Iraqi army soldiers being taken off to execution. The Iraqi army thinks the pictures are genuine, but they haven't been verified independently. The bloodletting doesn't stop. Here in central Baghdad today, a man wearing a suicide vest, quite possibly a sympathizer with ISIS, walked through this busy street market and blew himself up. 8 others died, many were injured. When we got there, it was eerily silent.
Until just a few hours ago, this was a typical Baghdad side street full of stalls selling things. Now, well, you can see there's just clothes. There are the remains of dead bodies still down by my feet here, and the gutters are still red with blood. But this sort of thing happens almost every day somewhere in Iraq and scarcely noticed by the outside world.
How did all this start? Many people in the West blame the invasion of Iraq in 2003 by the Blair-Bush alliance. Sunnis here say it's because the Iraqi government has been relentlessly Shiite in recent years and has excluded them. Tony Blair himself is unrepentant.
What we underestimated about Iraq, Afghanistan, about the whole of the region is that once you remove the dictatorship, then out comes this tribal, ethnic, and above all religious tension. And then you're engaged in a different type of struggle against that.
The type of war we saw in 2003 got rid of the dictator who had held the different religious and ethnic groups together by sheer ferocity. Without Saddam, sectarianism had free reign, not only in Iraq, but in Syria and across the region. And now the American and British troops have gone, the Iraqi government has to face an extremist Sunni uprising on its own.
If in Syria and Iraq there is a Sunni extremist entity with ISIS in charge that carves out a place for itself, it will be the great irony of the modern era. President Bush said he wanted to go into Iraq to fight terrorism. There was no terrorists. There are now.
Security in the streets here is intense. The Iraqi army received good training and good equipment from the US and Britain, but the events of the past week have shown that the Iraqi government still seems to need help.
Intervention is tough. Partial intervention is tough. Non-intervention is also tough. But the best policy for us is to realize that whatever form of intervention we choose, it's going to be difficult, but it's better than the alternative. We have to look at Syria and Iraq and the region in context. We have to understand what's going on there, and we have to engage. But it does mean that we actively try and shape this situation with our allies in the region, and don't believe that if we just wash our hands of it and walk away, then the problems will be solved.
As today's bombing showed, yet again, this country has been horribly damaged over the years. But the overthrow of Saddam, dangerous though he was, did remove the one brutal force which used to hold Iraq together. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
And friends, in a story related to this, Iran's President Rouhani says Tehran is ready to help Iraq in its battle against extremist Sunni Islamists, but sending troops is not on the cards. Now, he's saying the same thing President Obama is saying. President Obama says no boots on the ground, but we may help over there in some way, while other analysts say that the former prime minister has said that if the United States gets involved at all, that'll just add fuel to the flames. But speaking at a news conference, Mr. Rouhani said his country, now listen to this, friends. If this isn't ironic or double talk, I don't know what is. Mr. Rouhani said his country would certainly help the Iraqi government if it asked for it. He also did not discount the possibility, listen to this, he didn't discount the possibility of working with the United States to restore security to Iraq, but only if Iran saw that Washington was confronting what he called terrorist groups in Iraq and elsewhere. Now, just what does that last part mean, and elsewhere? Here's the video report on it, friends.
ما البته به عنوان جمهوری اسلامی ایران هم دوست عراقیم هم همسایه
As the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, we are both a friend of Iraq and a neighbor of Iraq. We have a very friendly and close relationship with the government. If the government of Iraq requests any help, we are of course ready to consider it. But so far, there have not been any requests for help. Of course, we are prepared to provide any help we can in the framework of the international law, should the government of Iraq make an official request.
تو این چارچوب اگر از ما درخواست کمکی بشه ما کمک میکنیم. آمریکایی‌ها ممکنه اقداماتی بخوام بکنم من از
The Americans might also want to help, but I haven't got any information on what they plan to do. But what is important for us is what the nation of Iraq wants and what the government wants. So we will help the Iraqi government if they require assistance.
به ملت عراق کمک کنیم ما آمادگی داریم. منتها من خودم میخوام اطمینان بدم به مردم عزیز خودمون.
Friends, did you notice that one of his comments there is that what's important is what's important to Iran? I mean, yeah, that's the name of the game over there. In Russia, Russia has reacted related to what's going on in Ukraine. Russia has reacted angrily to a violent protest outside its embassy in Ukraine, which saw windows smashed, the Russian flag torn down, and cars overturned. Russia accused Ukrainian police of doing nothing to stop the attack and called it a grave violation of Ukraine's international obligations. David Stern reports.
There were demonstrations yesterday in front of the Russian embassy. The protesters threw rocks and eggs at the embassy, broke windows, set cars on fire, and tear down the Russian flag. Now, Russia has condemned this action, and in particular, they said that the police did nothing to stop the demonstrators. In fact, the order was restored at the demonstration primarily by the protesters themselves. But this does point to growing frustration and, as I say, growing anger among Ukrainians, and we're expecting another demonstration in the center of Kiev later on today.
And friends, this next one, a little bit gruesome story in a way. I will play the opening warning tag at the beginning of this one.
The following report contains some disturbing images.
This is what happened after they dared to vote. A fingertip chopped off, a sinister warning from the Taliban. 11 elderly men punished on polling day. They asked us why we voted, he said. Then they took us to their base, they held us and threatened to cut off our fingers. There was no point resisting, so they went right ahead and chopped my finger off with an axe. Then they let us go. This man said we participated in the election and cast our votes to choose our president. In short, we were kidnapped and our fingers were chopped off. The men are now being treated in hospital in what's being seen as one of the most extreme acts of intimidation. They say they're just relieved to escape with their lives. but it shocked the election authorities.
Some insurgent groups cut their finger because they cast their vote for their favorite candidate. So there is a really bad news to the Independent Election Commission, and we condemn that.
But millions defied the threats of violence and turned up to cast their ballots in Saturday's presidential vote. An ink mark on the finger designed to reduce fraud, a telltale sign of participation. Now the task of counting and collating goes on in what's expected to have been a closely contested race with some fatal attacks and multiple reports of fraud.
Violence is a daily reality here in Afghanistan. These incidents show that in some places the Taliban continue to exert their influence. But more than 7 million people turned up to vote in elections broadly seen as a security success, with the Taliban having failed in their stated mission to derail the whole process.
The election may be over, but security remains tight, with the election authorities calling for restraint from all sides, hungry for a final result. Karen Allen, BBC News, Kabul.
Whew. Friends, and just to recap a little bit on that one, the election officials in Afghanistan have condemned the mutilation of nearly a dozen elderly men that were injured for taking part in Saturday's election. The 11 elders from a village in the west of the country were kidnapped by Taliban insurgents and had parts of their fingers chopped off as a warning to others who cast their vote in Saturday's presidential runoff. And that was Karen Allen with that report from Kabul. Now, friends, in Pakistan, the Pakistan Army launched a major offensive in the north near the Afghan border. It comes hours after fighter jets carried out an airstrikes against militant strongholds in the area. The crackdown follows an attack on Karachi airport last week. Mike Wooldridge has this report.
Families fleeing from North Waziristan ahead of the long-awaited launch of the new military offensive. They're moving out of the militants' mountain stronghold with all the household goods they can carry. They've already been punishing airstrikes. Because the situation there is very bad. Our schools are closed, the hospitals closed, the government is giving us great trouble. They're leaving behind what will be a highly challenging battle zone. The army tasked with eliminating all militants, Pakistani and foreign, and their sanctuaries. This was clearly the turning point. The attack a week ago on the airport in Pakistan's biggest city and economic hub, Karachi. These images shocked the nation. And the pressure then only grew on the Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to authorize an all-out offensive in the tribal heartland of the Taliban and Uzbek militants who admitted carrying out the airport attack. And so, for the foreseeable future, the hopes raised by the ceasefire in March between the Taliban and government forces and the exploratory peace talks have evaporated. Many in the army were always sceptical. The Pakistani Taliban, seen here training, began its insurgency 7 years ago. Thousands of troops and civilians have died in the intervening years. And Pakistan knows that the offensive now getting underway carries with it the risk of a violent backlash. That played into the hesitation of political leaders here about a bigger and broader operation in North Waziristan. But now the government says it already faces a war against the state of Pakistan. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News, Islamabad.
Thank you, Mike. Friends, there's trouble also today out of Israel following events from the past few days. Israel has accused the Palestinian militant group Hamas of kidnapping 3 teenagers who've been missing since Thursday. Hamas has denied involvement in their disappearance. Quinnen Somerville reports from Jerusalem.
Israeli soldiers pouring into the occupied West Bank on the hunt for 3 missing teenagers. Israel says the boys have been kidnapped. 80 Palestinians were detained. The missing are 19-year-old Ayal Ifrach, Naftali Frenkel and Gilad Shire are both 16.
Like many people here, the teenagers were hitchhiking their way home. It's thought that they may have got into a car somewhere around here. This was the last spot where they were seen, and that was 3 days ago.
As the search for the teens continued, Naftali Frenkel's mother appealed for their quick return.
We trust that boys coming home on their way from school, they were just on their way home, will be with us here and we'll hug them soon.
But this is quickly escalating into a political crisis. Israel's Prime Minister says Palestinian militants are to blame.
These teenagers were kidnapped, and the kidnapping was carried out by Hamas members. Hamas denials do not change this fact.
Hamas previously kidnapped Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. He was held for 5 years, then released, but the group denies kidnapping the teenagers. A spokesman said Netanyahu's statements are silly statements. We believe the latest extensive arrests of Hamas leaders, legislators and ministers are aimed at breaking the will of Hamas in the West Bank. Tensions here are increasing. Israeli-Palestinian relations may now hinge on the safe return of 3 missing teenagers. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Jerusalem.
And friends, for our last story tonight, I'm going to end on something that's, well, in a way it's light, but it involves the death of a celebrity from the United States. U.S. radio host Casey Kasem, who presented the American Top 40 Countdown for decades. And you know, we used to feature segments of that program on KSEP, Summer Fun Radio up in Orr, Minnesota, at a camp that was run by our church for decades, again up in Orr, Minnesota. We'd occasionally feature some of the segments from the American Top 40, Casey Kasem Top 40 Countdown show, just to keep campers and counselors and camp staff and leadership abreast of, you know, what's happening in the top 40 music world. You know, some of the top 40 was some decent music. Some of them had good lyrics. Some of them had good rhythms and happy tunes, and you could do some great Lindy Hop dancing to some of that music, and mixed in with, you know, everything else, classical, Western. You know, it's just a nice variety. You know, everybody doesn't have to like it, but we'd feature some segments from Casey Kasem's Top 40 Countdown. Casey Kasem, you'll hear in this video that honors him, how he was also the voice of Shaggy in Scooby Doo. Well, he's died at the age of 82. That was the same age that my dad died 6 years ago in 2008. So my dad wasn't present for me to honor him or celebrate Father's Day today, but I'm going to say a happy Father's Day to those of you out there who are viewing, who are fathers, who maybe will become fathers, or those of you who have a father, whether he's alive or not. You know, even if he's died, you're going to see your father and your mother and any other loved ones again in a resurrection. We talk about that kind of thing on the weekend sometimes. Sometimes we'll talk about it here because we present news related to the Bible and prophecy. But Casey Kasem had been ill for some years, and his family, unfortunately, were engaged in a public feud about how best to care for him. ABC's Brandy Hitt has the full report on this.
These are radio's hottest hits by music's hottest stars.
He's the legendary DJ with that recognizable voice that counted down our favorite songs for decades. Casey Kasem, born in Detroit, Michigan, never intended to spin records as a career.
Didn't want to be a disc jockey. I wanted to be a baseball player and an actor, but not a disc jockey.
But everywhere he turned, there was a radio. From starting his own high school sports radio show to working for Armed Forces Radio while serving in Korea. But Kasem's big break came after a series of DJ jobs across the U.S. On July 4th, 1970, American Top 40 was launched, with Kasem pioneering the countdown format. What Dick Clark was to television pop music, Kasem was to radio, also delivering thousands of those special dedications to millions of listeners.
A long-distance dedication from Patty to Roger.
He even helped bring cartoon characters to life, most famously as the voice of Shaggy on Scooby Doo.
Here it comes! An aerial attack!
In the 80s, his hit radio show became a spin-off television series, America's Top 10. After 39 years, Kasem's fans were shocked when he announced his retirement and handed over his microphone to Ryan Seacrest. Kasem would later develop Parkinson's disease, which eventually led to a family feud between his second wife and 3 oldest children, who claim they were kept from seeing him.
He can't really speak, but he knows we're there.
I'm Casey Kasem, counting down the hottest songs in the land.
Kasem's memorable voice may have been silenced, but during his last show, he said goodbye to his fans the best way he knew how.
Keep your feet in the ground and keep reaching for the stars.
Brandy Hitt, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Friends, and that's it for this Sunday night edition of Nightcast. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow evening, Monday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy. Casey Kasem used to love that show, and he did have quite a unique voice. One of those few celebrities who had a unique voice, like Garner Ted Armstrong, Paul Harvey, even Herbert W. Armstrong had quite a unique voice, and preached the truth on top of that. Friends, thanks for joining me. This is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying, till tomorrow night, till next time, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.